Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So you're from Saskatchewan or something like that? And he's from what? Mississauga? Where is that? Because, you know, Americans, we just think everything is north, and it's all the same. Because who cares? It's Canada. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Really, it's an honor to be here with all of you, and I know you're all out here to see me today. But I want to talk about a couple of really important things. Imagine a catastrophe that leaves 2.5 million children homeless, and at least 1 million of them are orphans. It's happening in what the United Nations calls one of the most dangerous places on earth for children. I'm not talking about the Ukraine, I'm talking about Syria. Young Syrians, many of them alone now, are scavenging, destitute, because of this 10-year civil war. Thousands of other children have had to escape over borders to find only new dangers, to find that they're not welcome. War, authoritarian regimes, Islamophobia, basically international and domestic forms of oppression. But there's something about this external oppression. To a certain point, here, all of us in the West, we can escape that external form of oppression to a certain extent. We can go home to a place of harmony, safety. We can almost sometimes shut off the world. But what happens when the source of oppression leaves you without that sense of sakan? Aleppo, the name of Syria's largest city, is synonymous today with suffering. In late winter, in 2016, children in an Aleppo orphanage were forced by bombs to live underground for half a year, never seeing the sun. This one 10-year-old girl, Yasmin, she says, "This might be the last time you see or hear from me. I've been living in an orphanage for the past 2 years. There are 47 children here. We all hope to get out of Aleppo." Syria's orphans, those children who've been brought into the world a second time. They're rescued after attacks that kill their brothers and sisters. And no one knows really how many orphans there are. We know how UN data works. It's those that are actually verified. Those that are unverified could be triple in number. The UN says there might be even 1 million. They've lost their homes, they've lost their families, they've lost their dignity in this war. They've lost everything. One 8-year-old girl, Fatima, says, "My uncle carried me on his back. I was on crutches and I couldn't climb up and down the mountains." She said they're hands of smugglers that made them walk for hours, and it took several tries to get them across. And once they were actually to the border, to the Turkish border, their mother, who was no longer able to care for them, gave the children to the orphanage in Turkey. Crossing borders can be dangerous. Not every country welcomes. Not every country is Poland welcoming Ukrainian refugees. And escaping Syria does not mean safety. In the streets of neighboring countries, people are also forced into labor, and some are sexually assaulted. This one young boy named Wa'il, he was asked, "When was the last time you were in school?" He said, "Grade 3. How do you survive? What do you eat? How do you find food?" He says, "If I have money, I eat. If I don't, I don't. My whole family died in the war. I have nothing. To survive, he scavenges for plastic to sell. He's often beaten by thugs." And the most heartbreaking is when he's asked, "What do you hope for?" He pauses and says, "I don't know what hope is." According to UNICEF, there are today 8.4 million children, more than 80% of Syria's children, but 8.4 million children throughout the world. And the 14 top countries where there are children who are suffering are 14 Muslim majority countries because of different wars. 8 in 10 children in these places need humanitarian assistance. Of the 6.5 million Syrians who have been internally displaced from their homes, even in that population, 3 million are children. And it's not just bullets that they're running from, and it's not just the skies that scare them. It's also lack of basic medical care. In a nation where countless hospitals and medical facilities have been bombed by both the Syrian and Russian governments, forget about routine vaccination services. Forget about protections from a pandemic. Deadly diseases like measles and meningitis are running rampant. And even polio, which was eradicated in 1995, is back. As many million children who have been orphaned by this war will tell you, access to education is almost non-existent. It's been really decimated. And since the beginning of the crisis, 4,000 schools have been destroyed. Half of school-aged children have never seen a school. And the UN warns against the dangers facing a population of young people without parents that lack education, that are today being trafficked and kidnapped. Schools have become war targets. You hear in the news today, the media, that there's a war criminal in Russia attacking a Holocaust museum. In Syria, schools were attacked. Serious effect to education of children. The UN says that if measures are not taken to uninterrupt the education of almost an entire generation, Syria's post-war society will never come back together. The impact of being deprived from an education, or worse, being orphaned and deprived, puts us in a situation where we can't really think about what this future is going to look like. But think about developing children's skills. Think about the very thing that Wa'il cannot fathom, hope. Any children who've been out of school for this long can't simply go back. We're talking about psychological problems. When one cruise missile costs $1 million and one child psychologist costs $10,000, we're doing something very wrong. Before the war, 94% of Syrian children attended primary and lower secondary school. Today, it's down to 20%. There's an economic, a humanitarian, and social reasons why it's really vital for us to think about this a bit more seriously. A new set of reports tells us that children who don't go to school will forever be embroiled in child labor. And this one young girl, Ala, in a Zatari refugee camp in Jordan, says, if we can at least get an education, we can have a chance to be self-sufficient, to provide for ourselves for the future. What is she asking? Not for a handout, for a hand up. What Ala is telling us is that she wants a future. She wants to be productive. She just wants a chance. We know that wars happen all over the world. We know that there are refugees and orphans all over the world. We know that there's a genocide in China and there's a genocide in Burma, and that there are atrocities happening in Yemen, that the entire population of Kashmir continues to be walled off, that there are injustices happening in Palestine, and that there are injustices happening in prisons of torture in Egypt. And yet, brothers and sisters, we tend to think that there's nothing we can do. But there's this interesting study that came out in 2017 that compares victims of violence by faith. And the most significant difference between Muslims is their response. Muslims will ask Muslims for help. They will ask their own people for help throughout the world. 51% of Muslims in war zones were said the first they were turned to is their fellow Muslim. This is 35% for Protestants, 28% of Jews, and 23% of Catholics. Muslims overwhelmingly, before going anywhere, will go to their community, will go to the Ummah, will come to us. When we think about the injustices in the world, war, and I tell my students, okay, we've laid out the land, it's pretty tough. Now, how are we going to get to peace? What does peace mean for us as Muslims in practical terms? When we think about the most crucial thing facing humanity, it's actually this idea of peace. And the goal of every human is to attain that level of peace. In Islam, it happens in two dimensions. The inner dimension, النفس المطمئنة, to get that طمأنينة, and the external dimension of society, of culture, of civilization, of community. And together, these form what's supposed to become peace on earth. But how do we get that inner peace and peace in our societies and communities? At the turn of the millennium, I actually worked at the United Nations on nuclear disarmament. And we're coming upon this millennium, this new time period, the one we're in today. And the then Secretary General Kofi Annan says, what is this next millennium going to look like? Are we going to be the people that are going to bring about peace? But then he says, if we really want to bring about peace, we need to rid the world of two things. The first is hunger, and the second is fear. Uncertainty. I don't know where tomorrow is going to bring. What does Allah tell us at the end of Surah Quraysh? What favors does He bestow on those who live lives in service? فَلْيَعْبَدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ الَّذِي أَطْعَمَهُم مِّن جُوعٍ وَآمَنَهُم مِّن خَوْفٍ. Imagine, fear and hunger. These are the two things that Allah promises will be alleviated if we do what? Allah says that worship leads to external peace. Peace of the heart and of the mind, so important. We're so fortunate. Look at us. We're sitting in a theater, right? Waiting to be entertained. And if you want to think about peace as this core essence of our identity, we have to ask ourselves, why are we here? This notion of peace germinating into the outer world begs this more important question. Both are necessary, but where does it come from? It comes from lives in service. When the Prophet ﷺ spoke about guidance and having to bring guidance to all, and how overwhelmed he was with this mission, he said, ﷺ, I'm like a man standing in front of a large fire, trying to stop fireflies and bugs from jumping into the fire. And the Prophet ﷺ says, I'm just trying to grab you from your belts to stop you from going into that fire. But you're fleeing from my hands. I can't grab everybody. I grab one group, the next one passes me and goes in. I grab this person, their parents escape me. When we see what's happening in the world, we feel like it's just that. That, okay, so you want me to sponsor one orphan? You want me to take care of one family? Do you see what's happening in the world? Allah doesn't ask us to do more than we can do. But He'll ask us about not doing what we could. When we look at the work of Islamic Relief Canada, they're doing the hard work. They're going out into the trenches. What are they asking us for? Support? They're making it so easy, maybe even too easy. So when Allah asks us one day about those 100 children we could have helped, how easily can I have said, I wrote a check. It's almost shameful how easy it is to affect the lives of children throughout the world. How as the Prophet ﷺ was grabbing us, can it be our salvation, that simple writing of a check? Because if it is, then we should be running to write those checks. As if the moment is upon us, that there's something burning in our hands. It's our ticket to salvation and we just want to get it out. We will be asked about those children. And yes, the shaitan makes us hesitate. When the Prophet spoke, alayhi salam, about that despair in front of the fire, with too many falling in, he says, maybe of one of those people I grab, maybe if one of the people I grab while everyone is falling in, he or she will stand next to me and help me grab more. Brothers and sisters, today Islamic Relief is handing us the opportunity to figuratively stand with the Prophet ﷺ to save those children. Those children expect us as Muslims to share their stories, to take care of them, to speak for them, to provide for them. Allah SWT, He created the wealthy, us, so that the weak and poor don't suffer. And they are. And so we're not doing our jobs. We're denying them a level of human dignity. When you think about giving this Ramadan, I really want you to think about those children suffering in this unjust world. And Allah says the greatest injustice we do to ourselves is when we look away. When we ignore what's happening and say, Allah is with them, there's nothing I can do. You know, we say believers are like one body. If part of it aches, the rest of it feels the pain. And today we think it's Ukraine and Kashmir and Palestine and the Uyghurs, the Rohingya. But what if it's us? Really, what if it's us? What if those of us who are sitting in places of privilege are not doing our job? What if we're the weak ones? What if the whole world is waiting for us? Brothers and sisters, those kids are waiting for us, and they are our ticket to salvation. And Islamic relief makes it so easy. Ramadan is upon us. And when we think about what Ramadan gives us, it gives us this tight sense of community after 2 years of being divided. And it's not about us. As individuals, it's really about community, embedding into us that communal reality that is the primacy of our divinely guarded mortals. As threat rises throughout the world, usually people respond with self-preservation. We don't. Our divinely guided purpose is not to take care of myself, it's to take care of all, even at the worst moments of threat. When you face the massacre in London and the unjust laws in Quebec, how did you, Muslims in Canada, respond? Your philanthropy doubled. Women started running for public office. You started actually becoming more integrated in your communities, and you're already an integrated community. Think about what that means about our individual roles. Allahumma ihdina wahdi bina waj'alna sababan liman ihtada. Think about what it means for us to be those very people. It's not about self-preservation. In times of crisis, how do Muslims respond? It's about the light of Allah. And we pray that Allah uses us for His beauty. Our message of love and beauty is not subjective. It comes from Al-Wudud, who is objectively the absolute love, the one who manifests the reality of love. We have false senses of love. We think it's compassion. As Muslims, it's beyond that. Remember I said the hadith, if one body feels pain, part of the body we all do, the rest of the body also feels love. Ramadan teaches us to free ourselves from ourselves, to find the best versions of ourselves. We're commanded, think about this, to deny ourselves food and drink, and we do it lovingly. We lovingly surrender to Allah, and we awaken to our human potential. This profound self-sacrifice. I always think about Ramadan as my opportunity to possibly meet a better version of myself. Ramadan teaches us to recenter. We have a virtue ethic that teaches us to realize the fullness of our humanity, to elevate ourselves, to become angelic, Maliki stations. It's from a place of deep purpose that we pursue justice, that we pursue taking care of those orphans, taking care of our communities, that each and every single one of us inspires those around us. The Prophet ﷺ, when he was in Ta'if, in that critical, difficult time, and he was making dua, I want you to think about it. The Prophet ﷺ was being pelted with stones. He's being abused. And he's making dua. An angel Jibreel comes to him and he says, if you want, I can take these two mountains and crush those people. And Prophet ﷺ says, I'm a prophet of mercy. And the dua the Prophet makes, if they don't become Muslim, even if they continue as is, perhaps amongst their progeny, there will be those that carry the banner. The Prophet is making dua while he's being hurt and abused and bleeding for the very children and their grandchildren who are attacking him. And within 2 generations, Muhammad bin Qasim al-Thaqafi, one of those that was in Ta'if pelting the Prophet, within 2 generations, the son, the Muslim leader, who was a teenager at the time, is the one who opened Western Sind to Islam, and that's how Islam came to the subcontinent. If the Prophet ﷺ had not made dua for those children, then think about where we would be. Think about where Islam would be in South Asia. Those of us who love South Asians, when I look at my children who are half Kashmiri, would they exist? Brothers and sisters, when we think about our children, our concept of virtue, it's really an extension of our subjective self. Our virtue as Muslims is the divinely inspired sense of duty towards everyone here and everyone over there. We're not expected to save everyone, but we're expected to do our part. And this Ramadan, inshallah, let us be the sources of justice for ourselves and for others, and comfort and love, and be the best version of ourselves serving humanity. Ramadan Mubarak, everybody. Thank you.